Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week, the Shattered Mirror Plague, Acedia. Acedia is a sin of spiritual sloth. It is a listlessness, considered particularly troubling to those outside society, like hermits, monks, and magi. It's similar to modern depression. According to Hans Christian Andersen, it is caused by contamination by parts of a shattered magical mirror. The following excerpt comes from a recording released into the public domain by Niru Ilya. Thank you to Niru.
You must attend to the commencement of the story, for when we get to the end, we shall know more than we do now about a very wicked hobgoblin. He was one of the very worst, for he was a real demon. One day, when he was in a merry mood, he made a looking-glass which had the power of making everything good or beautiful that was reflected in it almost shrink to nothing, while everything that was worthless and bad looked increased in size and worse than ever. The most lovely landscapes appeared like boiled spinach, and the people became hideous and looked as if they stood on their heads and had no bodies. Their countenances were so distorted that no one could recognize them, and even one freckle on their face appeared to spread over the whole of the nose and mouth. The demon said this was very amusing. When a good or pious thought passed through the mind of anyone, it was misrepresented in the glass. And then how the demon laughed at his cunning invention! All who went to the demon's school, for he kept a school, talked everywhere of the wonders they had seen, and declared that people could now, for the first time, see what the world and mankind were really like. They carried the glass about everywhere, till at last there was not a land nor a people who had not been looked at through this distorted mirror. They wanted even to fly with it up to heaven to see the angels, but the higher they flew the more slippery the glass became, and they could scarcely hold it, till at last it slipped from their hands, fell to the earth, and was broken into millions of pieces. But now the looking-glass caused more unhappiness than ever, for some of the fragments were not so large as a grain of sand, and they flew about the world into every country. When one of these tiny atoms flew into a person's eye, it stuck there unknown to him, and from that moment he saw everything through a distorted medium, or could see only the worst side of what he looked at, for even the smallest fragment retained the same power which had belonged to the whole mirror. Some few persons even got a fragment of the looking-glass in their hearts, and this was very terrible, for their hearts became cold like a lump of ice. A few of the pieces were so large that they could be used as window panes. It would have been a sad thing to look at our friends through them. Other pieces were made into spectacles. This was dreadful for those who wore them, for they could see nothing either rightly or justly. At all this the wicked demon laughed till his sides shook. It tickled him so to see the mischief he had done. There were still a number of these little fragments of glass floating about in the air. And now you shall hear what happened with one of them.
And thanks again to Niru Ilya. No further quotations required. In brief, a grain of the glass catches in the eye of a boy. He becomes so cold-hearted that the Snow Queen, a potent fairy, claims him, and the girl next door who loves the boy goes on a quest, awakens the true love virtue, and the boy regains the ability to cry, which washes out the grain of glass, or perhaps dissolves it, saving him. They return to their lives, marry, and are happy. In my first few attempts to convert this to Ars Magica, I wanted to design the demon, or the Snow Queen, or a horde of tiny contagious demons, but I don't think any of that's necessary. I think the grains are a new sort of infernal vis, which, for convenience, I'll term vis malevola. Vis malevola has few sources, but apparently can be widely scattered, and acts as vis infesta, see Realms of Power, the Infernal, page 38, with the following additional qualities. A person under the effect of a piece of vis malevola gains the personality trait Acedia 1, gains 1 experience point in the Acedia personality trait each time the character makes a personality trait roll, or player choice, that supports the ascetic mindset, and cannot see happy or good things, and this is represented as a penalty equal to the Acedia trait on all other personality trait rolls that oppose Acedia. If the piece of vis malevola is removed, the Acedia trait ceases to increase and can be decreased via opposing rolls, much as other traits. Alternately, it can be removed entirely by the aid of the divine. Those suffering from mystical acedia, however, often cannot see the point in seeking divine assistance, as they're unable to see the good in or the use of anything. In the original story, the boy is saved by true love, and true love is, in mythic Europe, an emanation of the divine. A quick story hook. As a great lover of fairy stories, I'm struck by the question of how much the Snow Queen knows. She's on the side of the angels in this one, at least in the sense that C.S. Lewis, in his younger and less empathetic years, would have classified her as delivering the chisel blows of God, which hurt us so much but bring us to perfection. Is she a highly cognizant fairy forcing the victims of the plague to embrace true love? Is she utterly incognizant and merely adapted to her role by the environmental pressure of the existence of the Vis Malevola? Is she a tainted fairy that collects a tiend of souls for hell? If the Mirror Maker still has students and servants, what do they think of her meddling? What will they do, and how can she fight back? What horrors has the Mirror Maker created since? I'd also like to quickly note that this story was the source material for a beautiful poem by William Butler Yeats called The Two Trees. My favourite version of it was recorded by the Canadian harpist and songstress Lorena McKennett, and I encourage you to find that on the internet. Next week, a new type of ghost. Well, I say a new type of ghost, but the stories that I'm nicking them from are over a century old.